I used to lie awake at night with thoughts spinning endlessly in my mind, like a wheel that refused to stop turning. It would start with something small, a word someone said, an uncertain look, an unfinished task. And before I knew it, I had constructed 1,000 scenarios in my head, none of them peaceful, none of them real, just shadows cast by the restless mind. There was a time I thought this was normal, this inner noise. I believed that if I just thought long enough, I'd solve everything, that I'd find certainty, clarity, control. But instead, I found myself trapped in loops that only led me deeper into exhaustion. My body was tired, my soul even more so. And in those long nights of overthinking, it felt as though peace was a distant land I could never reach. Then one day, I met an old monk. I hadn't intended to speak with him. I was just passing through a small village in the hills when I noticed him sitting beneath a tree, completely still. His presence was quiet, but powerful, like the silence that comes just before rain. I don't know why, but I sat beside him. He opened his eyes slowly, as though returning from somewhere very far away. Without even asking my name, he said, "You're carrying a mind full of winds, always moving, always chasing." I looked at him, stunned. How could he know? "It's not your fault," he continued. "Most people mistake thinking for understanding, but the more they think, the less they see." I told him about my nights, the endless worry, the scenarios that haunted me, the need to plan, fix, anticipate. He just listened, and then, after a long pause, he told me a story. There was once a man, he said, who stood by a river, watching a leaf caught in the current. The leaf spun in circles, pulled by eddies and tiny waves, never moving forward. The man grew impatient and threw a stick into the water, hoping to force it along. But the stick just tangled with the leaf, making its spinning worse. I asked him what the man should have done. He smiled gently. "Nothing. The river knows the way. The leaf will find its path when the water settles." I didn't fully understand then, but something in me softened. That night, I didn't try to fight my thoughts. I simply watched them. I observed how one thought led to another, how fear disguised itself as logic, how regret wore the mask of memory. I saw how my mind, left unchecked, created entire worlds of suffering with nothing but imagination. And the more I watched, the less power those thoughts had. It wasn't easy. My mind tried to drag me back into its loops. But I remembered what the monk said. The river knows the way. I started to ask myself, what if I didn't need to fix everything right now? What if I could allow uncertainty to exist without solving it? What if peace wasn't the end of all problems, but the space between them? The more I let go, the more stillness I found. And in that stillness, something beautiful happened. I began to notice things I'd missed before: the sound of my own breath, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the gentle rustling of leaves outside my window. Life was still happening, even without my constant thinking. Perhaps even more clearly without it. I had spent so long trapped in the illusion that thinking would save me. But overthinking is not awareness. It is a storm pretending to be clarity. Now, whenever my mind begins to spin, I pause. I return to my breath. I remind myself, let the river flow. Let the leaf drift. I am not the thought. I am the witness. And in that gentle witnessing, the loop begins to dissolve. Peace was never something I had to find. It was always there, just beneath the noise, waiting to be remembered. A few months after meeting the monk under the tree, I found myself at a small monastery tucked between the mountains. I hadn't gone there in search of anything specific. I just felt drawn, like a silent invitation had been lingering in the wind. The days were slow there, simple. We would rise with the sun, eat plain food, and spend hours in quiet reflection. No phones, no schedules, no demands. Just the rhythm of breath and the sound of the world, unfiltered. One afternoon, during a quiet teaching session, an elderly teacher stood before us with a bowl in his hands. He looked around the room, eyes gentle, yet sharp, like someone who had watched many minds suffer needlessly. He said, in life, pain is inevitable, but suffering, that's optional. Those words stayed with me. Then he began to share what the Buddha once taught, what he called the parable of the two arrows. He said, imagine you are walking through a forest and suddenly an arrow pierces your arm. The pain is sharp, immediate, and real. That's the first arrow. But before anyone can help, you scream, why me? Why now? This always happens to me. You begin imagining worst-case scenarios. What if I lose my arm? What if I die alone in this forest? You blame yourself. You blame others. You spiral into fear, regret, and panic. That is the second arrow. He paused, then asked, which arrow causes more suffering? The room was silent. We all knew the answer. The first arrow is life, he said. The second arrow is your mind. That parable unlocked something in me. I started seeing it everywhere, in every disappointment, every anxious thought, every memory I couldn't stop replaying. Life had pierced me with the first arrow many times, but it was I who kept shooting the second one, again and again. I remembered a time when someone I trusted deeply betrayed me. That was the first arrow. It hurt. But I didn't stop there. I kept returning to it in my mind for years. I questioned my worth, blamed myself for being naive, doubted my ability to trust again. I built an entire prison from that single wound. And the worst part, I didn't even realize I was doing it. Overthinking, I came to understand, is often the second arrow. We believe that by replaying events, we'll find closure. That if we imagine enough scenarios, we'll gain control. But all we really do is bleed more. The mind doesn't like uncertainty. It wants answers, reasons, safety. Life doesn't always offer those things. And in the gap between what we want to know and what we can know there, the second arrow flies. That day, I sat under a tree in the monastery garden, holding the story of the arrows close to my heart. And I asked myself a simple question. What if I stopped shooting the second one? What if, when something painful happens, I could say, "This hurts," and just let it be? No extra stories. No mental battles. No guilt for feeling pain. Just presence. I began practicing this. The next time I felt anxiety rising in me, I didn't fight it. I didn't analyze it. I just said silently, "First arrow, don't shoot the second." I focused on my breath. I let the feeling pass like a wave. It wasn't easy, but something miraculous happened. It passed quicker than usual. Without the second arrow, pain became lighter. It wasn't suppression. It was surrender. I realized that healing doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from not needing them, from sitting with the wound gently, from being kind to the mind that so desperately wants to protect us, even as it causes harm. The parable changed how I saw everything. When a friend canceled plans, I didn't assume they didn't care. When a project failed, I didn't decide I was a failure. When my mind spiraled, I no longer believed every thought it produced. Instead, I began meeting life as it came, one arrow at a time. And I can't tell you how freeing it is to finally stop the self-inflicted wounds. Now, when the first arrow strikes, I breathe. I say, "Let this pain be enough. I will not suffer more than I must." And in that moment, the loop of overthinking begins to unravel, replaced by clarity, stillness, and a quiet sense of compassion for myself and for all beings who carry invisible arrows in their minds. Day after day, we all get hurt. But we don't have to keep hurting ourselves. We can stop at the first arrow. We can choose peace. There was a day at the monastery when I sat by the lotus pond for hours, completely still, but not because I was meditating. My mind was loud again. Thoughts kept rushing in like waves against rocks. Old regrets, unfinished conversations, fears of the future. One after another, they flooded my mind, each one convincing me it was important, that I had to think it through just one more time. I tried to push them away. I told myself to focus on the present, to breathe, to be mindful. But it felt like I was drowning in a sea of invisible noise. Just then, one of the younger monks sat down beside me, silent. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. After some time, he gently said, "You are trying to silence the mind by fighting it. That is like trying to calm water by splashing it." His words hit something inside me. I looked at the pond. Its surface was smooth, undisturbed, but only because the wind had stopped. Not because the water forced itself to be still, but because it had nothing to resist. Then he said something I'll never forget. The present moment isn't something you reach. It's something you fall into when you stop clinging to past and future. I realized then that I had been trying to think my way into peace. But peace doesn't come from thinking, comes from presence. That day, I stopped trying to escape the moment and instead let myself fall into it. I closed my eyes and listened not to my thoughts, but to the world. The soft hum of dragonflies, the gentle creak of bamboo in the breeze, the distant bell from the meditation hall. None of them demanded anything from me. They simply were, and so I let myself be too. For the first time in a long time, I didn't follow my thoughts. I watched them pass like clouds. Some were dark, some light, some stayed longer. But none of them were me. I was the sky behind them, vast, untouched, eternal dot. In that moment, I felt something shift inside. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was like remembering something I had always known, but somehow forgotten that now is enough. The more I returned to that awareness, the more space I found in my mind. Not because my thoughts disappeared, but because I stopped giving them so much importance. I learned to meet each one with curiosity instead of fear, with softness instead, and in that awareness, I discovered something else: gratitude. Not the forced kind, but a quiet, natural appreciation for the sunlight dancing on water, for the rhythm of my breath, for the simple fact that I was alive and able to witness it all. It was as if the present moment had been patiently waiting for me. Beneath all my overthinking, my planning, my self-judgment, waiting like an old friend, holding out its arms, saying, "You don't have to run anymore. Just sit with me. Just be here." And the more I surrendered to now, the more I began to heal. Overthinking began to lose its grip. I didn't need to figure everything out I didn't need to have all the answers. Life didn't ask me to be perfect, only present. One evening, while sweeping the temple courtyard, I noticed something strange. My mind was quiet, not because I had forced it into silence, but because I was simply here, fully engaged. The broom in my hand, the dust in the air, the fading golden light of dusk. There was no room for overthinking, only awareness. And in that ordinary moment, I felt extraordinary peace. It wasn't something mystical. It was simple, clear, real. I began to realize that awareness is always available. It's not a special skill. It's not reserved for monks or masters. It's our natural state before the noise, before the stories, before the endless thinking. You don't have to go to a monastery to find it. You can find it in your breath, in your footsteps, in the sensation of water on your skin, in the act of drinking tea without scrolling your phone, in the way the morning light falls on your floor. Each moment offers a doorway out of the mind and into life itself. And the more we walk through that doorway, the more we remember we are not our thoughts. We are not our fears. We are the stillness that sees them. We are the awareness that watches with compassion. This is the path the Buddha walked, not away from life, but deeper into it. One breath at a time, one step at a time, one moment at a time, and it's still open for us. Right here, right now. It was during my third week at the monastery when I first heard the story of the empty boat. A senior monk was giving a talk under a banyan tree, and a gentle wind rustled through the leaves as he spoke. We sat on the ground, listening, not so much with our ears, but with something deeper. He began like this: there was once a man rowing his boat across a quiet lake. The morning fog was thick, and everything around him was still and silent. Suddenly, out of the mist, another boat came floating toward him. It struck his own with a loud thud. Startled and angry, the man shouted, "Who are you? What are you doing? Watch where you're going." But as the mist cleared, he saw that the other boat was empty. He paused and looked at us slowly. No one had been steering it. The boat had simply drifted with the current. We all remained quiet, letting the meaning sink in. That story stayed with me for days. I found myself reflecting on it constantly, not just as a parable, but as a mirror. How often, I wondered, had I reacted with anger or frustration? People, at circumstances, at life itself, believing someone else was to blame, believing I was the victim of their carelessness or cruelty. But what if the boat was empty? What if the thing I was angry at wasn't personal at all? What if people's actions were not deliberate attacks, but reflections of their own pain, confusion, or unconsciousness? And more importantly, what if clinging to control, trying to steer every boat in my life, was what caused my suffering? I began noticing how much of my overthinking came from this illusion that I could control outcomes, people, emotions. That if I said the right thing, planned carefully, stayed vigilant, I could make life behave. But life doesn't obey. It flows. Sometimes gently, sometimes wildly, and I was just one boat among many. There was a day, not long after, when this lesson became very real. One of the other visitors at the monastery had spoken harshly to me, snapping at something I said during our shared chores. For a moment, my chest tightened. The thoughts began immediately. What did I do wrong? Why is he treating me this way? Should I confront him? Maybe I should just avoid him altogether. The loop had begun. But then I remembered the empty boat. I paused. I took a breath, and instead of reacting, I simply watched him walk away. Later, I found out his mother had fallen ill, and he had just received the news that morning. His anger had nothing to do with me. His boat was drifting, unman-caught in a current of pain. I almost let it capsize my peace. That moment changed me. I started looking at life differently when someone cut me off in traffic. I saw an empty boat when plans fell through or people disappointed me. I remembered, not everything needs a reaction. Not everything is personal. And even if someone is steering their boat, I don't have to crash into it with my anger. Letting go of control didn't mean becoming passive. It meant becoming free. Free from needing everything to go my way. Free from taking offense where none was intended. Free from the exhausting task of managing every variable. It meant trusting the river, trusting that life, like water, knows how to flow around obstacles. I found that the more I released my grip, the more I could resonate just in my body. But in my soul, I had spent so many years rowing furiously against currents, shouting at boats, trying to avoid collisions that never really mattered. And all the while, I had missed the beauty of the lake, the softness of the mist, the peace of simply floating. Now, when the urge to control rises, I return to the image of the lake. I see myself there, drifting gently. I see another boat approach. I feel the impact, but I no longer reach for blame. I simply smile and let it pass. Some boats are empty, some are not. But either way, I don't need to take the collision as proof that I've failed, or that the world is against me. Sometimes, things just bump into each other, That's life. It doesn't mean I'm unsafe. It doesn't mean I'm unloved. It just means I'm human on a vast and living river, with other drifting souls, and the greatest peace I found is not in mastering the current and open. That's what the empty boat taught me, that I don't need to control everything to be at peace. I just need to let go.